Hello, welcome to CGTN. This is a special coverage on China's 8th National Memorial Day for the Nanjing massacre victims. I'm Pan Deng in Beijing. 84 years ago, more than 300,000 people were killed during Japan's invasion of the eastern Chinese city of Nanjing in a span of 6 weeks. 11 survivors of the massacre passed away this year, leaving the total registered number of survivors at just 61. The Chinese national flag was lowered to half-mast Monday morning at the Memorial Hall of the victims in Nanjing massacre by Japanese invaders in the eastern Chinese city of Nanjing. In about 15 minutes, a memorial ceremony will be held there. Commemorations will also be held across China. Our reporters are standing by. And here in our Beijing studio, we have Professor Xia Lu from Renmin University of China for more insights into this occasion. Now let's cross live to the eastern Chinese city of Nanjing. Our reporter Wu Bing is standing by at the Memorial Hall of the victims in the city. Wu Bing, you've been following the event very closely. Give us a sense of the atmosphere there.
Well, Pan Deng, the atmosphere is quite solemn. We can see that over 3,000 representatives, they are standing here, they're waiting for the ceremony to start to commemorate the over 300,000 lives killed by Japanese troops in 1937. And earlier this morning, as you said, China's national flag was lowered at half-mast. And in about 15 minutes, the ceremony will start at 10 o'clock. And we will see wreaths being presented by guards of honor. We will listen to a speech made by a high-ranking official. And also, Bell of Peace will be ran by 6 representatives. And 84 students will recite peace declaration. And this year, due to consideration of health issues, the survivors of Nanjing massacre, they cannot be here at the ceremony, but their families will represent them. So over the past 8 years, since 2014, when China first establishes National Memorial Day, more and more people around the world participate in it. So this is a day to commemorate all those lives killed by Japanese troops and also to cherish this peace and the stability. And also I'll be here to follow the latest and bring it to you. Back to you, Pan Deng.
Thank you very much. Our reporter Wu Bing in the eastern Chinese city of Nanjing. As we just mentioned, commemorations are held across China on this very day. And for more on that, let's cross live to our reporter Yu Li. She's standing by in the northeastern Chinese city of Shenyang. Yu Li, tell us more about the commemoration there.
Yes, Pan Deng, I'm in the September 18th Historical Museum in Shenyang. Memorial events are holding here today to commemorate the victims of Nanjing massacre. Students, as you can see, are reading elegies, and they will light candles and leave flowers to honor the victims. And participants will watch the movie City of Life and Death to remember this harrowing chapter of history. There's also a picture exhibit that shows important moments of the tragedy that happened 84 years ago. And due to COVID-19, memorial events will be held both online and offline. And the number of participants will be capped under 150 for pandemic prevention. The September 18th Historical Museum has a special meaning for the Chinese people as it commemorates the incident Imperial Japan used as a pretext to invade China in 1931. The incident initiated a 14-year war of aggression against China, which included the infamous Nanjing massacre. So these memorial events are especially important for remembering the past and cherishing the current state of peace. Back to you, Pan Deng.
Thank you very much. Our reporter Yu Li in the northeastern Chinese city of Shenyang. Extensive documents have shown that during the Japanese Army's 14-year invasion in China, it engaged in some of the worst crimes against humanity in history. The Nanjing massacre was one of them. Here are more details about that.
In 1931, the Imperial Japanese Army invaded Manchuria, in China's northeast and occupied vast swaths of land there. Some 45 million casualties were recorded. The Japanese war policy: plunder, kill, and burn. And that was given full play in December 1937, when it seized the eastern city of Nanjing, the then capital of the Republic of China. According to the Nanjing War Crimes Tribunal in 1947, more than 300,000 people were massacred over the course of 6 weeks. Over 200,000 women were raped, tortured, and killed. Many were forced into sex slavery. Dozens of mass graves have been discovered over the decades. In 1998, more than 60 years later, the remains of 208 people were recovered from a relatively small grave. In 2014, the Chinese government designated December 13th, the day Nanjing fell, as a national memorial day.
For more insight, we're joined in the studio by Professor Xia Lu from Renmin University of China. Professor, first of all, what does the Nanjing massacre tell us about true face of Japanese militarism and imperialism?
Well, thanks for the question. First, we need to recognize that the Japan, or the Japanese imperial kind of government back then, was against the Geneva Convention, because it not only killed, or it not only kind of attacked this kind of military forces, but also it attacked the civilian, and it just organized systematically kind of a slaughter against the civilians. So it was a kind of a crime against humanity. And then when we kind of look back the history, we can consider another kind of question, which is why did the kind of government back then failed to defend its capital back then in 1937? Actually, it was back then the Republic of China. The government organized some kind of defense in Shanghai. However, that was in early August, but in late September, in early October, well, this kind of defense was just in a failure and in a total kind of chaos. So it couldn't defend the capital, and then it couldn't defend the people. So, well, that left the civilian in the tragedy.
Well, Professor, we'll be getting back to you on this. And it's not only the Chinese people who mourn the victims. The commemoration is also very important for the whole world. A Russian scholar says commemorative events like this should be held across the globe.
Председатель Китайской Народной Республики Си Цзиньпин сказал, что помнить историю.
Chinese President Xi Jinping once said we should honor history for a better future. I couldn't agree more. I think this is a special and tragic piece of Chinese history. The Chinese people, like the people of the Soviet Union, won their victory after losing millions of lives. That's why the meritorious service of our people will live forever. The Japanese committed atrocities in Nanjing. Many people were tortured and massacred. They also set up so-called comfort women camps, where crimes were committed against women. They murdered these women to hide their crimes after they lost and surrendered. Such large-scale commemorative events should not only be held in China, but all around the world. There is a need to keep reminding people what happened 80 years ago and the atrocities committed by Japanese soldiers. When did World War II break out, and how did it come to an end? The Nuremberg and Tokyo trials were the last battles of the World War II. It's a horrific piece of history. We can't wait for the fire to start and then put it out. We need to stop the fire from burning in the first place and hold people who create divisions accountable. It's extremely crucial for every one of us.
China is not the only country that witnessed mass killings during the Second World War. Now let's take a look at the Holocaust and how other countries and regions around the world remember its victims.
Every year, many countries around the world honour victims of the Holocaust, the genocide of European Jews by Nazi Germany. In 2005, the UN instituted January 27th as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. On that day, in 1945, the Auschwitz concentration camp was liberated by Soviet forces. However, some countries have their own Holocaust Memorial Day. Germany had held ceremonies on this day for years, but in 1996 the country made January 27th a national day of remembrance. The Jewish state of Israel has a special day to mark the Holocaust. Yom HaShoah, meaning the day for the Holocaust in Hebrew, was made official by law in 1959. The day-long event begins on the eve of the 27th day of Nisan. the first day of the year in the Hebrew calendar. In Romania, October 9th is the national day for commemorating the Holocaust. The date was chosen to reflect the country's role in the deportation of Jews to death camps. Romania was allied with Nazi Germany early in the war.
Professor Xia, we know this is the 8th Memorial Day in China for Nanjing massacre victims. Why is it so important for the country to set up this highest level national memorial event for those victims? Why history matters so much for all of us?
Well, first of all, we actually live in history. We cannot forget about history, and we cannot just live in the total present time, because history is connected with the present. And the other kind of thing marks the significance is that we have only 61 survivors here. So maybe in the future, next year, these 61 survivors will gradually pass away. So if there was no people talking about or telling about the real history, then what would China become? What would China's younger generation become? So the designation of the December 13th as the National Memorial Day is a very important signal to show, especially to show to the next generation, that Chinese people shouldn't forget about history, shouldn't forget about the victimhood in modern Chinese history. So Chinese people should remember where did we come from and where should we go. That's connection between the past and present and even future.
Right, since you mentioned the importance of history and also the link between history and present, so we know the very fact of Japanese Imperial Army killing so many innocent civilians and surrendered soldiers, by the way, why there have been continuous denial in some Japanese politicians and even in Japanese textbooks on this hard fact engraved in world history?
Well, in a famous book titled Chris Asimov and the Sword, written by Benedict, actually the author analyzed this point in a very wise way. So the author argued that in Japanese people, in their mind, there was a kind of a feeling, or there was a kind of feeling of being failed or failed, but not a feeling of a kind of I was doing something wrong or something I have been doing wrong, so I should kind of apologize for this kind of thing. So there is no apology, the feeling of apology in the Japanese people's mind. There's only that, okay, I have some kind of, there is a distance between me and some kind of the advanced country, so I should do more to, get to that point. But in their mind, there is no feeling of doing something wrong. So that's the most important difference between, if we argue the Japanese and other country who made also the wrongdoing in the Second World War.
And Professor, as we're talking about this, we're watching live footage from Nanjing, a national memorial ceremony for the victims of the Nanjing massacre in 1937 is about to happen very soon. So back to our discussion, Professor. We know it took 14 years for the Chinese nation to finally won that bitter struggle. But as you just mentioned, the back then KMT government even gave up on its capital. So who was the pillar of this arduous fight?
Well, actually, when we look back at history, we can see clearly that the Communist Party of China actually, shouldered this kind of task in defending the Chinese nation, in defending Chinese people, because it was the CPC, it was the Communist Party of China that first, holding or first held this kind of the flag of nationalism. Although the KMT was nationalist party, but back then, well, the state building or the entire state building or the nationalist kind of the Chinese nation identity was not kind of in a very full form. So it couldn't organize a very successful and effective defense against the invader. That is why the CPC, the Communist Party of China, gained a lot of support back then in the popular.
Right, now let's cross live to Nanjing, where the memorial ceremony for the Nanjing massacre victims is about to happen. Now, honor guards are entering the memorial site for the victims of Nanjing massacre. This is happening now in the eastern Chinese city of Nanjing. 84 years ago, more than 300,000 Chinese people were intentionally massacred by Japanese invaders. And in 2014, China set up this National Memorial Day for Nanjing massacre victims. Back then, 300,000 people in 1937 were killed by Japanese invaders in Nanjing. You're watching live footage from the eastern Chinese city of Nanjing, where a memorial ceremony is happening.
The National Memorial Day ceremony for the Nanjing massacre victims begins now. Play the national anthem of the PRC. Please join me in a minute of silence for the victims. Minutes of silence is over. Please lay wreaths for the victims of the massacre. member of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee and Vice President of the State Council, Sun Chunlan, will now deliver a speech. Compatriots, comrades, friends, today we gather here in commemoration for the massacre victims, as well as all of those lives that are lost during the war against Japanese invasion, and all of the martyrs who have laid down their lives. And we must learn from the history and open up a new chapter in history. And this is our way to showcase our commitment to a peaceful development path. 90 years ago, the Japanese troops has initiated the September the 18th incident and taken over the northeast China. And then the July 7th incident took place in 1937, and since began the war of the Japanese aggression. And this has brought about major losses for the Chinese nation, and we are at the most difficult and dangerous time in our history. 84 years ago, the Japanese troops invaded Nanjing and has created this Nanjing massacre, in which 300,000 lives have been murdered, and women are insulted and raped. Many children die in this massacre. And the Nanjing, the old capital of China, has become a hell on earth. This is a war crime. That is one of the biggest atrocity in human history and during the World War II history. In order to fight against Japanese aggression and save the Chinese nation, the CPC took the lead to fight against the aggression and conduct these activities against the aggression and invasion, and stick to the comprehensive resistance against Japanese aggression, and has saved hope for the Chinese nation and become the mainstream for national resistance. After 14 years of struggles, more than 35 million lives have been lost. This is the cost for us to finally win this war against Japanese aggression. This great victory is also a great contribution to the anti-fascist war worldwide. Since then, no invaders can ever act in this kind of atrocious way in Chinese territory. We have recovered from the major difficulties and miseries in history and is now working towards national rejuvenation. Dear comrade, this year marks the 100th years anniversary of the establishment of the CPC. In the past century, the CPC has led China to win battles after battle and victory of the socialist revolution. We have also conducted reform and opening up and socialist construction and has made great achievement in achieving socialism with Chinese characteristics. Currently, we have accomplished the first centenary goal for building a moderately prosperous society and comprehensive modernized country. The great national rejuvenation has now ushered into a new chapter, and it showcases this new behavior, a new era for the Chinese nation. This is the best way to memorize those lives and victims that were lost during this Nanjing massacre, as well as the war against Japanese aggression. In a new era, we have to stick to the CPC leadership. The major achievement in the past century has clearly demonstrated that without the CPC leadership, it will not be a new China and there will be no national rejuvenation. The CPC leadership has undergone the testament of history and the test of the people, and this is the root to national prosperity and also where the interest of the people in China lay. We must stick unswervingly to the comprehensive leadership of the CPC, as well as the spirit for the founding of the party. Patriotism and idealism is the guides that will lead us to this new era. To open up a new chapter and conduct new acts, we must stay true to the people-centered ideas in order to face all the kind of risks in our way ahead. We must work with the people and take the people's interest at heart, especially when we are faced with the outbreak of the COVID-19 worldwide. We have always stick to people first and lives first in order to curb and contain the spread of the outbreak and protect the interest and safety of the people at all costs and to safeguard the health and security of our people. We must always stand together with the people and to play to this democracy of the people. Stick to poverty alleviation in order to address the imbalance in development and to promote all-round development of the people so that we can all reach common prosperity. And this is a tangible achievement for our country. To open up a new chapter and conduct new acts, we have to continue to advance the community of shared future for mankind. After this Nanjing massacre, a lot of international friends have risked their lives to protect Chinese refugees. Their humanity spirit and fearless acts will forever be borne in mind of the Chinese people. Their descendants have continued their friendship with the Chinese people. We have to have the correct understanding of history in order to know what we are going forward. We must learn from the past to open up new chapters in the future and to build this China-Japanese relations of the new time. We must work with all peace lovers across the world to build permanent peace, and common prosperity and stability in order to build an inclusive and beautiful world. Comrades and friends, our history continues to move forward, and national rejuvenation is also underway. Against this new backdrop of history, let us unite closer to CPC Central Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core, and stick to Xi Jinping thoughts on socialism with Chinese characteristics, and cherish the centenary achievement of the CPC, and understand deeper to the two establishments, and strengthen four awarenesses and stick to four competences in order to realize the two safeguards, so that we will live up to the aspiration of the martyrs and the lives that are lost in order to achieve the two centenary goals, as well as national rejuvenation. We must make our own contribution to human development and prosperity. And now, the youth in Nanjing will recite the Ode to Peace. Relentlessly, the Yangtze River passes the majestic city of Nanjing. Haplessly, a tragedy befell the ancient city on December the 13th, 1937. Recklessly, the Japanese invaders filled the Yangtze River with the blood of our people. Miserably, 300,000 of our brethren perished in the abyss in 6 weeks. Angrily, the plum trees blossomed to echo the outrage felt by all mankind. Deeply, we mourn the heavy blows on our civilization for 100 years. Regrettably, our weak nation languished from troubles domestic and foreign. Resolutely, we fought to liberate ourselves and build a prosperous nation. Definitely, the obstacles in the past will only make us stronger in the future. Vigorously, our nation recovers from the shadows of the history 84 years ago. Earnestly, our friends from China and abroad gather at the 2021 memorial ceremony. Solemnly, we remember our dead and write a new chapter for the living.
大道之行，天下为公。
justly we go about the reconstruction of a nation in prosperity and harmony. Peacefully, we endeavor to begin a new age of national rejuvenation. Roundly, we will embrace the future while always remembering the past. We will embrace the future while always remembering the past. We will embrace the future while always remembering the past. Nanjing Memorial Day ceremony for the victims of the Nanjing massacre is now concluded. The Nanjing massacre historical facts exhibition is now open for visit.
There was a national memorial for the victims of Nanjing massacre held in the eastern Chinese city of Nanjing. Now, for more insight into this ceremony, we're joined in the studio by Professor Xia Lu. So, Professor, as we just heard from the speech made at that memorial by Chinese Vice Premier Sun Chunlan, she said that China, it's not only about looking back at history, this particular occasion, it's also about looking forward. And she said that China will be committed to the peaceful development path. Tell us, what does that entail in China's domestic and foreign policy?
Well, actually, China now is kind of looking forward to the next centennial mission, and during the process from now to the mid of this century, actually there would be some kind of challenges, and it would be some kind of unanticipated this kind of issues, problem, and all these kind of things should be dealt with properly and should be dealt with in a proper way in order to pave the way for the next mission. And there shouldn't be war, because the Chinese people and Chinese nation, cannot afford another war, cannot afford another kind of military, let's say, actions, because this kind of thing would cost a lot, not only the energy, but also the nation's kind of dignity in the fulfillment, fulfillment of the next mission. So the peace, would be the major or the main target of Chinese diplomacy, and also the peace is the main target for the domestic policy, and that's the kind of signal to show to the next generation, not only to the next, but to the entire world.
Right, since you mentioned the next generation, and at the memorial ceremony, we saw younger generations were also attending. Why is it so important for the next generations to come in China, to remember this one of the darkest chapters in China's modern history?
Chinese President Xi Jinping, actually, he attached a lot of significance to the task and importance of next generation. In his speeches, we can regularly see that he always talks to the next generation, to the youth, and he attached a lot of significance. And he argues that the way or this kind of the success of China's kind of future and the next mission should be shouldered and should be, let's say, held by the next generation. So the next generation should not forget history and should remember what Chinese nation kind of endured in the modern kind of time in the Second World War and other kind of struggle sessions. And also Chinese next generation should learn more, should open their mind, should not just dwell on the past. Well, the history shouldn't be forgetting, shouldn't forget, but the future, well, should be kind of be an open one. And Chinese next generation had a kind of a long way to go, and that's the main point that the President Xi Jinping attached a lot of significance to the next generation.
Since you mentioned that, what would you say are the core elements of that legacy and that spirit from Chinese people's 14-year arduous war against the Japanese aggression, and also Chinese people's 1 century-long arduous fight to finally gain liberation and independence?
Well, one of the most important elements, I would argue, is national unity. And the national unity, well, should be based on the national identity. So Chinese nation, Chinese national identity is being built. And this is a long way to go. And this is the ongoing process. And this is the first one, national unity. Without national unity, there would be no kind of organized defense and effective defense against the invader. Second is that Chinese people should have the faith, should have the confidence that, there would be final success. And then the next point is that never forget about the struggle. So all the kind of the peace, all this kind of purpose will not come, let's say, in an easy way. So without struggle, without without fight, there would be no this kind of the final success. So I think these are the points should be remembered by the next generation.
What about, you mentioned national unity, that is of course very crucial, but what about people's power? We know a fundamental difference between the CPC and KMT back then in those dark days of the Chinese nation is that the CPC always believed in the power of the people and depend on it. But on the contrary, the KMT was always looking forward to some kind of foreign help to help it to fight its enemies.
Yes, of course. People-centered way not only in economic development but also in the social development and national unity. So people-centered kind of philosophy, I would like to argue, is the main one of the main components of the Chinese, the Communist Party of China's philosophy, and always connecting to the people, always standing with the people, always defending the interest of Chinese people would be the secret to the success of the CPC.
Right, Professor, we'll be getting back to you on this. And staying with the topic, Japanese officials' controversial visits to a war shrine in Tokyo have long been criticized by the international community, particularly neighboring countries. But Germany, another Axis power in the Second World War, has gained much credit for reflecting on its role in the Second World War. Gao Yiming has more details.
Yasukuni Shrine, established in 1869 at the order of Emperor Nanjing, to commemorate those who died in service to Japan. Located in Chiyoda, central Tokyo, around 2.5 million souls are enshrined here, including some convicted of war crimes during the Second World War. In early December, about 100 Japanese lawmakers visited the shrine, including 9 junior ministers of Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's cabinet. The move sparked anger and criticism from neighboring China and South Korea, who called on Japan to face up to its history of colonial invasion and demonstrate its reflection through actions.
The Yasukuni Shrine, where 14 World War II Class A war criminals are honored, is a spiritual tool and a symbol for Japanese militarists to launch a war of aggression. The visit of Japanese political figures to the Yasukuni Shrine once again shows Japan's wrong attitude of refusing to reflect on its history of aggression.
These controversial visits to the shrine by Japanese officials have been going on for years, fueling the anger of the Japanese public and neighboring countries. Former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe regularly sent ritual offerings via his aide during Yasukuni spring and autumn festivals. And back in 2013, Abe made an in-person visit to the shrine during his tenure. The move triggered over 270 Japanese plaintiffs to file a lawsuit against him for fueling tensions with neighboring countries and violating the constitution. More than 360 later joined this legal battle against Abe, including those from Japan, China, and South Korea. Similar lawsuits had also been filed against past prime ministers.
We see Yasukuni as a symbol to idealize and condemn war. Having the prime minister or lawmakers visit the shrine will send a message that we do not have remorse for the past wars.
The Japanese government has often played down the nation's wartime atrocities, an attitude that has upset the victims of war and their relatives. One of the most controversial issues was the use of sex slaves. It's estimated that over 200,000 women, mostly in Asia, were forced into sexual slavery by Japanese soldiers during the World War II. But Japan has long denied such a practice. In contrast to Japan, German politicians have expressed remorse for the nation's role in the world wars. In a commemoration ceremony held by Warsaw in 2019, German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier apologized for the Nazis' 1939 invasion of Poland, marking the beginning of World War II, as well as Germany's advances in the rest of Europe.
I bow my head in grief before the victims' pain. I ask for forgiveness for Germany's historical guilt, and I recognize our enduring responsibility.
And on the 75th anniversary of Nazi Germany's official surrender to Allied forces, senior German officials, including the President and former Chancellor Angela Merkel, held a commemoration in Berlin. They laid wreaths at the memorial for the victims of the war and violence.
We need to keep Europe together. We must think, feel, and act as Europeans. If we don't keep Europe together in and after this pandemic, we will prove not to be worthy of May 8th.
In Germany, the horrors of wars are remembered through monuments to the victims. In Berlin, the memorial for the murdered Jews of Europe is dedicated to the over 6 million Jews that were killed by the Nazis. The monument, made out of 2,711 concrete slabs in the center of the city, resembles a cemetery. It opened in 2005, 60 years after the end of World War II. Historians say the past must be remembered.
No one expects of later generations that they feel guilty in the view of acts that were committed long before their birth by Germans in the name of Germany. But the responsibility for your own country always includes the will to face up to the whole history of this country, and that goes for all Germans.
As Winkler says, if a country wants to look forward, perhaps it must always keep an eye on its past. Gao Yiming, CGTN.
Relations between Japan and South Korea are considered to be at their lowest since the end of the Second World War as a result of successful court cases brought against the Japanese firms and the government by Koreans forced into sexual slavery and factory labor during the war. Jack Barton reports.
Lee Yong-soo was forced into sexual slavery for the Japanese army at age 16. She broke down earlier this year while demanding the issue of sexual slavery during Japan's colonial-era occupation be taken to the International Court of Justice.
There is no other way now. Our government must review Japan's crimes through international law.
The issue of the so-called comfort women remains a burning topic in South Korea, which is dotted with statues honoring the victims, including one outside Japan's embassy. Tokyo claims all outstanding colonial-era issues were settled in a 1965 agreement, in which Japan paid a large sum of compensation that many credit with kickstarting the South Korean economy. The South Korean government says that agreement only covers intergovernment affairs and does not cover individual victims or their families from seeking compensation through the courts. It's not just victims of wartime sexual slavery that have been pursuing and winning compensation cases. People forced to labour for firms like Mitsubishi have also won cases, leading to asset seizures and an unprecedented trade war between Japan and South Korea, currently experiencing their worst relations since the end of World War II.
The whole issue actually is coming from that, sad history between Japan and Korea, Japan's colonization of Korea during World War II. And that's why the issue is very deep-rooted in history.
South Korea's president has said the dispute over the historical record with Japan will not be easy to solve.
Despite our efforts, we cannot rule out the possibility that the situation will inevitably be prolonged.
The pain for the victims is very real. But there is also criticism that politicians in both countries are fanning the flames of nationalism for the sake of votes.
They use this as their political leverage. So whenever they are in a deep trouble, they want to stimulate or instigate this kind of hatred among ordinary people.
Even without political agitation, the issue of colonial and wartime abuses by Japan remains an issue that won't easily go away in South Korea. And as the number of surviving victims dwindles ever lower, the memorials and organizations fighting for justice continue to grow. Jack Barton, CGTN, Seoul.
Well, Professor, let's talk a little bit more about China-Japan relations in current terms. And as we just heard from Vice Premier Sun Chunlan's speech at the National Memorial, she said that we should develop a China-Japan relationship that fits the requirements of the new era. So do you think that could be a challenging mission, since, as we just reported, Japanese politicians keep visiting the Yasukuni Shrine, keep provoking China on the Taiwan issue, and also keeping their efforts trying to change Japan's pacifist constitution?
Well, it is difficult because actually we can compare that the Japanese official and the German official. Why did German official kind of face their wrongdoing in a very sincere way? Because Germany actually is located in the center of Europe. So in Europe, actually all the countries are close to each other. So Germany, well, whether it like or not, it should be sincerely kind of taking the wrongdoing so that it can develop the further relationship and the face in the future. However, when we look at Japan, Japanese official, Japanese statesmen, Japanese politician, they always wanted to, get rid of Asia. They don't treat themselves as one of the Asian. They treat themselves as one of the G7 or G8 or the developed kind of industrialized countries. So they thought that maybe, it's due to some kind of errors we made in the World War II, so that we failed because of kind of strategic fail. So it is not we kind of did something wrong that we should apologize for all these kind of Asian people. So if they couldn't recognize this, if they couldn't, treat this in a proper way, I think in the future it's always been a kind of a difficult point that facing the China-Japan relationship. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Xia Lu from Renmin University of China. And that's it for this special coverage on CGTN. China held a national memorial for the 300,000 victims of the 1937 Nanjing massacre on Monday morning, and we leave you with images of that national memorial to remember the history. I'm Pan Zheng in Beijing. Stay tuned for more news to come on CGTN.
向南京大屠杀死难者默哀。